Welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. I am Charlie Paparelli. We publish these interviews on every Friday. If you want to make sure that you don't miss one, please subscribe at paparelli.com. That's paparelli.com. I am an angel investor and have been for the last 25 plus years. And during that time, I have met with hundreds of entrepreneurs and learned from them how to start and build companies from scratch. It's been an amazing career that I've had. Just so enjoyable to be soaking in all of these new ideas with these great people. And that's what we're really all about here. Is this show is all about helping entrepreneurs start and build new companies from scratch. And our topic today is a corporate executive's view of acquiring startups and also building leaders. I have with me today as my special guest, very special guest, is a dear friend, Jim Porter. Jim was the first executive that I worked for who actually was a man of faith. And just watching Jim comport himself, how he interacted with people, the strategies that he would put in place, how he would interact with companies, it was incredible to just watch him because he was so much different than some of the other executives that I had worked with at the time. So he started me down a path that was important for my career development. He is a successful technology executive, has been in the technology sector for over 50 years, okay, and is still in it today. He is also an industry developer. Jim was on the committee for the AICPA, okay, to put together the Financial Accounting Standards Board's decision on how to recognize software revenue and also capitalization of software. That goes back way back into the 70s is when that all took place. And Jim was one of the leaders on that committee with the AICPA. He also showed me what it meant to be a general manager. I had never heard the term, but he didn't talk about CEOs. He didn't talk about COOs or presidents. He said, you want to be a great general manager. And he talked so highly about it. It's what I wanted to be. And he mentored me along. And to this day, he continues to mentor me. He's been a lifelong mentor. And we most recently have reconnected. And it's been just a delight in my life. So here's Jim, still active at 85 years old and looking to continue in the industry and help. He's also a former board member for 17 years, I believe, on Silicon Valley Bank. So he's out there in San Francisco watching the best of the best deals come through and has a network that is to beat the band with regard to VCs, CEOs from all over the world. So Jim, I am so glad that you're here with me.
Well, you've honored me by asking me and makes me remember a lot of things and probably not remember a few others. But it's been a great life that I've enjoyed along with my wife, Leela. And she's been very important to everything that I've done. We've done together, and I'm kind of proud of that. And I do believe there is an art to management and that it's worth studying. Even Peter Drucker had a lot of good ideas over the past.
It's funny, we don't hear a lot about Peter Drucker these days.
No, we don't, do we?
No, he doesn't. He wasn't. People don't really speak about management very much. In fact, from my experience, within these startups. It's all about entrepreneuring. It's all about the idea. It's all about the minimal viable product, it's, but you don't hear management. You don't hear Peter Drucker.
Yeah. Well, over the years, I think the various roles that I played, I forget the actual number of acquisitions, but it was in the 30s.
Oh my goodness. And that's what I wanted to talk about there. You've done a lot of those acquisitions. And Richard Brock, my former partner, and I were one of those acquisitions.
Yes.
And you've got such a long career. There's so much to talk about, and I thought maybe the best place to start is where we met. Okay. So, and that happened with you. You were with Informatics General Corporation, which was a public company at the time, later acquired by Sterling Software in an unfriendly takeover. Okay. But you were the executive that were probably part of the team that came up with the strategy in the corporation to do these acquisitions. What was it like back then? What was happening at Informatics General Corporation? I think, weren't you one of the two guys running the company at the time?
Well, there were two executive VPs, and I was one of them.
Okay.
And then the company was broken into two parts. One was what we call the systems division, and the other was vertical markets.
Oh, okay.
And so turns out your firm, Management Control Systems, fell under vertical markets and to the accounting profession and the tax profession. And so you guys were doing that. And the informatics board was wanting more growth in the company.
Okay.
And so there were a couple of sessions on, okay, how do we do that? And the CEO didn't feel like the current product line had enough growth in it to satisfy the shareholders. And it was a public company. And so the board turned to the acquisition question and wanted to acquire small companies.
Okay.
And turns out from my
but that was a big deal, though, Jim, because at the time you came, obviously back then, we're coming out of the 70s. It was all mainframe based vertical markets that you were involved in, right? Did you come in through the life insurance division?
Right. We had formed a couple of companies building software for the insurance industry. And the first one of those we took public. We did an IPO the first 18 months. And
wow. So those things actually happened back then. I thought it took a lot longer to go public back then.
Well, it should have, but it didn't. Yeah. And so
what made it such a hot company that other people that you were able, that, the investment bankers were able to take it public at the time?
I think it had to do with the fact we could spell computer. It was that hot in those.
What year was this?
Oh my. That was somewhere around probably the late 60s.
Okay. So then how did you guys then become, I think that was in Dallas, wasn't it?
Well, there was one in Austin. The first one was Austin.
Okay.
And then there was an insurance company in Dallas, big company that wanted to commercialize their data processing.
Okay.
And so they recruited my partner and me to come and head up a company in Dallas called United Systems. It was an embryonic company, and they gave us free rein, and we were able to develop a number of software products for the life insurance industry, and some for the property casualty as well.
How come they went outside instead of to guys like you, as opposed to saying, well, we've got an IT staff? Why would, or didn't they have an IT staff? I don't know.
Well, some did, some didn't. Very few had what you might call a development staff.
Oh, okay.
And so what we would do is we would contact these big companies, and insurance companies are powerfully strong for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
If they get over $1 billion in force, you can't kill them. And so they had plenty of money.
Warren Buffett recognized that early on, didn't he?
Yeah.
It was that was his early acquisition there.
But they had plenty of money, but very little talent. And so we would select, maybe half a dozen of these big companies, invite them to Dallas, and have a 2 or 3 day session of what do you need?
Huh.
and they would all kick it around and come down to maybe a couple of things that they could all agree on. And then we would make an estimate of what it cost. They would split it and pay for it. And then we owned all the rights, and we would sell it to other companies.
So they would actually use the product, and then you would have the rights to resell the product.
Right.
Wow, that's unbelievable. What a deal.
Well, I'll continue with that if you want to. So we've basically had every insurance company of note, of size, on our customer list. So there was no problem with collecting receivables.
Yeah.
And if we needed a loan, which we never did, but they were standing ready to give it to us. And we just had good timing.
You know, it's interesting, to these days, everybody's like, you need to do customer discovery, right? This is all about startups. Mm-hmm. Customer discovery is saying, who is my customer? What problem am I solving? You skipped all that. The customers came to you and said, here's what we need, and we'll pay you to do it. What an opportunity.
Well, we pulled them in and we got particularly close to a company in New York City, Equitable Life Assurance, and they were the third largest in the world at that time. Mm. And they had 300 vice presidents. And we got in close to them, their president, and other execs. And my partner and I actually conducted a strategic planning session with those 300 vice presidents, and they paid us $100,000 to do that. They all went to Rytown, New York, and we went up there and conducted a 3-day strategic planning. But anyway, I'm diverting a little. Because
you had all of those customers built in. Yeah. That's why the investment bankers said, well, you guys already own, you didn't even write your first line of code, and you own the industry technology the industry's technology products, right? So they said, let's go public.
Well, it wasn't quite that easy, but anyway.
You make it sound that way.
Yeah, it was fun. And so the Equitable liked us so well that they bought us.
Oh, okay.
And they had previously bought informatics, which very few people knew. And they merged us into informatics, and that's how I got there.
Well, help me with something. If Equitable, who's an insurance, they're a customer, and they're competing with other life insurance companies. Mm-hmm. How did that impact the business, having a customer buy you? Didn't that sort of cut everybody else off in the industry?
No, they weren't like that. They were different. And and they got along fine when we brought them all to Dallas and discussed, what do you want next? And they ended up very graciously to pay for it.
Okay.
So, and I think more of that could be done today by, I'm a great believer in user groups and user group meetings. Uh-huh. And you can accomplish that sort of thing through user groups. And most of these people at the top of the
when ladder, you say accomplish that sort of thing, would be a little bit more definitive as to what
by getting sponsored research.
Oh, I haven't heard anybody actually pulling that. I mean, I have recommended that to people, but I haven't heard anybody actually pulling that off.
Well, it works.
Okay. And, is there a trick? Is there some method that you should use, or some way to approach, you think, these users or customers to get sponsored research? Any recommendation that you would make on how to get that accomplished?
Yes, I think you can do it primarily through user groups, and primarily along with that, let's say the CEO or high-level executives in your company goes out and gets to know these people.
Okay.
Now, it's not always easy to knock on the door and get in, but there are ways to do that by finding out who the influential executives are that have a path to the CEO and influence.
Do you think that it would that this type of thing would really only this strategy would really work best only in vertical markets? And maybe even small vertical, meaning they could be big like life insurance, but it was a small vertical, meaning you didn't have thousands of companies. You had really
you make a good point. That makes sense, and that's the way I've seen it work. Because mostly I've been associated with vertical markets, and but this life insurance thing, mainly life insurance, we did investments as well. I have investment software. And that also got us quite a bit of notoriety in all kinds of companies like Nationwide, Allstate, Pacific Mutual, you name it.
Got it.
And
might be a little bit more difficult now because one of the things that when we were in some of the companies that I had invested in, Jim, they were selling into some of these. In one case, it was property and casualty companies. Mm-hmm. And I always said that the biggest competitor for our company was the internal insurance company's IT staff. Mm-hmm. In other words, we were selling. They were competing against us because they had that project on their list to develop it, and so I always said it was the project that would never happen. But that they would not buy our product, but they wouldn't build their own, even though the IT guy, the CTO, would say, "Oh yeah, we're going to build that," but they never got to it. So, you didn't have that. You said they didn't have a development staff. Now everybody has a development staff.
Well, and my thinking is that they still buy outside software. Mm-hmm. And they might rummage around a little bit with it, change it some. Most of it can be added to rather easily. So I would say that some of them do have good staff, but by and large, they depend on the outside stuff.
Yeah, I got that.
And that's true throughout the technology world today.
But I think, I think there's maybe fewer people, leaders in the vertical, the people to approach.
Yes.
Right. To say, because if you're dealing with a vertical, for example, like Richard and I were in, which was CPAs. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were like ants, right? So there's nowhere to go, so it took a while to kind of pull enough of them together so that you could pull something like that off. And we did that with some of the applications that we've done. That's interesting. So you became part of informatics because you became part of Equitable, which then owned informatics.
Which then owned informatics for a short time. And then informatics, they wanted to cash in, Equitable did, and it's 2 or 3 years later, I guess.
Okay.
And so then informatics, including our company, which had been integrated, I was now living in California as executive VP of informatics. And so we went on the New York Exchange and Equitable got their money.
I got it. Did you guys make any money on the deal?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, they included us a little bit. We were pretty young in the business, and but
because back then you were probably maybe in your early 30s, mid 30s, I guess.
Probably mid to late, yeah.
Okay.
But
they didn't make you. You didn't make enough money, that you were, independently wealthy at the time.
No, and really retiring never occurred to me, even if I had.
Well, you've lived that life. You've proven that out.
And I still have fun,
Yeah, I know. I get it. So how did you get identified as a leader in the business, through all of that? It's one thing to have your own business, as you did with this whole, the software business, the development business you were doing down in Dallas or Austin, as you said. But it's then you become part of Equitable, then you become part of informatics. how did you be the guy? How come? I mean, there were a lot of executives. I mean, a lot of people who could have become executives, but you became an executive. Why you? What happened? What was that path?
I really can't answer that very, very well, except I was very impressed with what I learned in graduate school, business school.
Okay.
And,
What school was that?
Pardon me?
What school was that?
That was Harvard.
Oh, Harvard. Okay.
And that was, I was surrounded there by really smart people and tough people, and who came from wealth and who came from, places I'd never heard of.
Tell me about what you mean by tough people.
People who would make decisions and kind of like the 1812 captain, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And deal with problems as they occurred, not as they accumulated. And
okay.
And that could get me off on the idea that management's an every day, every hour job.
Okay.
And if you're going to be a good manager, you're on it every day. And if you've got a problem with a person or a division or a customer, you deal with it. And you get it settled one way or the other. And the customer isn't necessarily always right. I have fired customers before because they were disruptive. And by that, I mean just gone in and taken the system because it was on lease and I still owned it. I could do that. And
I do like where you say that deal with problems as they occur, not as they are accumulated. But at what age were you, and what did you decide to go for an MBA at Harvard? How did that come about? Because that's another big decision that gets made by a lot of people during their career.
Yeah, I was teaching in the engineering school at Texas A&M.
Okay.
I was on the faculty there. And
while you were you mean you weren't a full-time faculty member, were you?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I came out of the Air Force, and my old department head at A&M said, well, I know you need a job, but why don't you come here and teach? I said, who, me? And he said, yeah, you. Come on down here, let's talk and go see the dean. And before I knew it, I was on the faculty.
What were you teaching?
Well, I taught operations research, which was a predecessor to AI, today's AI, and I got introduced to computers. A&M had a fantastic computer department, and I taught industrial labor relations, and those were the two subjects that I taught. And
there you were, as a recent alum of the Air Force, and you're teaching labor relations, industrial labor relations, never having done industrial labor relations.
Well, actually, I had some experience. I had taken the course.
Right, late, and what?
I'm sorry that phone is in the room.
Right, late, and what? Right, late, and what?
But yeah, and
you've taken a course, so that was the extent of your experience.
Well, the other thing is my father was a business agent for a labor union.
Oh, okay.
And I grew up in that environment in the construction business. He was a bricklayer, and I learned to lay brick. Worked my way through school that way, and so I knew something about labor unions.
So give me the short then. You go from the Air Force, and then you become a professor at Texas A&M, teaching operations research and industrial labor relations. Yeah. How did it go from there to Harvard? And if that was the next step, and then from Harvard really into the software business?
Well, that's a long timeline, but I'll try. The so I had I got 2 grants. Summer after my first year teaching at A&M, I applied for a grant from the National Science Foundation
Uh-huh.
and to go to Oklahoma University and to study computer programming, and which I did for 6 weeks. And then I got another grant from Gulf Oil Corporation, which got bought by Exxon, I think,
Uh-huh.
but to design for them a critical path scheduling system, computerized for their refinery maintenance.
And so these grants were available to professors.
Yes,
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
yes, and I got those, and I made more money that summer than I got teaching 9 months.
I don't even
Anyway.
want to ask you what they paid you at Texas A&M.
Not much.
I'm sure it was Air Force pay.
It was $400 a month.
Okay, great.
So let's see from there.
But don't forget, you got a really good title.
Well, I learned a lot about it, the academic community at that point. And then later on, I taught 4 years at Abilene Christian University, entrepreneurship and philanthropy. And so I learned.
That was after your that was after most of your business career at that point.
Right.
Yeah. So you never left the teaching. You've always been a great teacher. That's why you're such a good mentor. You know?
But I kind of leveraged that into knowing quite a bit about the higher education community. And that landed me on the Board of Regents of Pepperdine University, and also the Board of Trustees of Abilene Christian University.
Oh, okay.
So I've been on there forever on both of those. And
What a wonderful network to tap into.
well, it is, especially
Yeah.
the Pepperdine group. That's a pretty prestigious bunch of people.
Yeah, they're in Malibu. Is that where that is?
They're in Malibu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember standing on that campus once and looking out over the ocean. It's just an incredible view.
It is a beautiful view. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew it, but Sam Wiley had a house down there in the Malibu colony. And when he was trying to buy informatics, I visited with him down there. And but anyway, that's another time, another story.
Yeah. Sam Wiley was the chairman of Sterling Software and also
Right.
Michael Stores. Okay. To go
That's
back
right.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're
So how did you get into, how did Harvard come up?
oh, okay. We're back to so I'm teaching at A&M, and a friend of mine calls me, and he's gone to work for Mobil Oil, I think. He was a petroleum engineer, and he had decided to go to Harvard. And so we were good buddies, and he said, Jim, you ought to do that too. And so he had applied, and he was an alternate. And so I sent in my stuff.
What was your reaction to when he said you should do it too?
I
I mean, we always have friends that always say you should do it too. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good.
Yeah. Well, I thought that would teach me things about management.
Ah, okay.
So I had
Why
come
was
to know-
management the thing that comes to mind as to it would teach you things about management as to probably if people go now, they would say it teaches me things about being a better businessman. Okay.
Yeah.
So why management? Why did you bring it up as that?
Well, I saw the power there of being able to get things done. And looking around me, I saw examples that I didn't particularly approve of. And and higher ed will do that to you.
Oh, really? Are they sort of people that accumulate problems as opposed to
Yeah,
solve problems?
I think that's a good way of putting it.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And blaming others.
Okay.
And rather than taking on the responsibility. And so anyway, I applied and got accepted, and then he got accepted as having been an alternate, we drove up there together with family. By then I had two little girls, and Leila and I had married. And so anyway, out of that
That was something about Leela. She followed you all over the place, that woman.
Oh, she's a princess.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway,
How long you married now, Jim?
65 years.
65 years. God bless you, brother. All right. I should say, God bless Leela.
Well, we've had a truly charmed life, and we're very happy about it. And kids are good. And
So what was it like up there? So two little kids, early
tough.
in marriage, and you're going
Really
to a
tough.
full-time Harvard MBA.
Yeah, we had very little. Well, we had no money. All I had was what I had made that summer on those two grants, and and so we found an apartment, third story walk-up flat, and anyway, it was pretty tough, and the study.
What was most challenging for you there?
What?
What was most challenging for you as you look back on that Harvard
Just
MBA?
management of time, and the fact that we had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and Leela wasn't able to work, and we all got the mumps. You ever have the mumps?
Yeah, I did have the mumps, to tell you the truth.
And and we had it sequentially, and Leela wasn't able to take in typing. I wasn't able to work because I was going to school. So we finished up the first year and decided I better go to work or we're going to starve to death. And so I did, and I came out of there, and probably the best thing that happened to me up until that time was I got offers from Collins Radio, IBM, and Acme Brick. And I remember I had a bricklaying background. And they were looking for an executive VP. But anyway, I took the IBM job. And
why is that?
Well, I had studied computing and took a course at A&M while I was teaching, and I liked it. And I liked programming, and so anyway.
Well, what did they? Let me ask you, Jim. So, tell me. They always say about going for your MBA that it creates a lifelong valuable network by going to an MBA school. Did that happen to you? Was that true for you?
Very limited.
Okay.
And part of that was probably because I left after the first year. And so I went in and said, look, I just can't, I don't have the money, and
I see.
Kids are sick, and wife can't work. I've got to go to work. And they said, well, look, we'll find the money for you. And, but you can either take our loans, or you can return in 5 years and be immediately admitted.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, well, I'll take the 5-year option.
Cool. Okay.
But I got so involved, I never went back. And and later on,
it did have that impact on you that you kind of fell in love with management. Okay, in that regard,
it had
the
a
leverage
great
that management
impact.
Brings, right?
Yeah, it had a great impact on me because I saw toughness, and I learned to read financial statements. I learned to dissect them. I learned to present alternative strategies to a class of 90 intelligent people, and I found out what a real executive looked like when they would come in and talk to us, and so then I went to work for IBM, and when I left IBM, I left it to that startup, to do that startup in Austin, Texas, with one of my buddies.
Where were you with IBM? Up in New York?
I was with IBM in Dallas.
Oh, in Dallas. Okay. So it brought you back to Texas.
I was promoted to to the Washington area as a systems engineering manager. But before that, we were a systems sales team. This partner of mine, he was a PhD in physics, and we managed 420% of quota in one of those years, and both got promoted, and we got the IBM company-wide President's Trophy, and they made a big deal out of that, and they liked our production. And
That's when they had probably at least 100,000 employees.
oh, it was a fantastic company.
Yeah.
And they trained you and trained you and trained you. In the early days of training, about every third day, someone would come to the door of the classroom and they'd call out a name, and that person didn't come back. And they weeded them out early, not late.
But they trained early, not late too, right? I mean,
Yes.
they put you in an environment and tested you hard for weeks. This wasn't like a 2-hour training class.
No. These were 6-week training periods by subject. And so I learned a program, I learned a system design, and I was there when the 360 came out, if you remember back that far.
My goodness.
But anyway, so IBM was wonderful, and but my partner and I left, and we started this company in Austin.
Did you go through any kind of, were you there? How long were you with IBM?
5 years.
During that time, did they put you through any kind of management training as opposed to just, I know you're talking about functional training. Okay. But did they bring you through management training too at some point?
Yes. Yeah. When they made me a systems engineering manager, they also gave me 30 of the best, brightest people you can imagine that worked for me. And,
Wow.
And they gave, I don't know, continual management training. It wasn't like, 6 weeks and you're done. It was like all the time. And it was constant through communication and through classroom and et cetera.
What's really interesting is because you see now in startups, you see things. I still remember when Google started to grow, they were hiring like 1,000 people a month kind of thing, and you think in terms of that type of growth. Uber had the same thing, all this going on. I don't understand how they had managers. I don't understand how they trained anybody. It's sort of like, here, Jim, you have 30 people. You're a manager. And you go like, what's a manager? Right? I don't know how to communicate. I don't know how to do reviews. I don't know how to hire. I don't know how to fire. I don't know how to manage people and do project. I just don't know how they do it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, many things that IBM taught, I felt like, was how to fire somebody.
Okay.
And that if they need firing, you fire them. And they had behavior codes.
Well, this was before the days of everybody gets a trophy for participating.
Obviously, yeah. Yeah. I know there was a sales guy who did a hit and run, and while intoxicated, and he was fired on the spot, and I took him his final check into his house, and he was not welcome back. I mean, and so it was that kind of company. They didn't mess around with you if you didn't do your job. And so that was good training. And later I read a book.
But that is interesting, though. They were always, I remember when I got involved with IBM, when we were working with IBM, this is in the mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
That's when they had their general systems division, which was their mini computer division here, which of course followed the mainframe, or what they called something systems. What did they call it? I can't remember the mainframe division that they called it. But anyway, you always were dealing with the best of the best people.
I felt that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it just was. I remember thinking back then, here I was, 22, 23 years old, working with Richard and our little company. And I remember coming back from a demonstration we did at IBM and saying, we need to be like them. I still remember how impressed I was.
Well, and later on, when I became CEO of Triad, uh, I carried those values. And it turns out that they already had many of those values because one of the three founders of Triad Systems had been with IBM.
Oh, okay.
And so he was in charge of the sales and marketing and building it up, a wonderful man, Christian man, and as were the other two founders as well. And just a marvelous environment to go into. But we'll come back to that if you want to later.
Yeah, we could. Yeah. But I want to now I understand how you kind of made that path, from the Air Force to Texas A&M, to Harvard, to IBM, to this small startup, as you talked about. Okay. When you got into that startup, it seems like now you had a wife and you probably had more than two kids at that time.
No, the third one came along after we got to Dallas.
Okay. So how could you go from IBM, whom you really respected and had a great career, being 420% of quota and getting the entire organization award for best performers? Why go to a startup? Particularly with still the complexities of a family.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure I can explain that, except we wanted to get back to Texas, and and we were in Virginia at the time with this SE manager's job, and my former partner called me up, the one we had worked with some before, and he says, "I'm going to leave IBM, and I'm going to Austin, and I've lined up funding to start a computer and software company."
Huh.
And he said, "I want you to come with me." And so I did.
Wow.
We got back to Texas, and
what did you say when you went back to? So here you are, finally in a good job, and you go home one night and you tell Leela this. What was that conversation like?
Well, she played bridge while they packed.
So she was like, "Okay, Jim, if you're saying we're going to Austin, let's go to Austin."
Yeah. And our kids, we talk to our kids now that, we've been through all of that, and say, "Did we help you or hurt you by moving you around?" And they, to the three of them, they say, "Oh, it was great. We learned new friends and we liked it in retrospect. At the time, it was a little tedious, but looking back, it was good."
Were you able to make the same account? Were you able to duplicate your salary that you had at IBM in this startup?
I don't even remember.
Okay.
But I do remember that we had stock options in the new company that we were doing in Austin. And like I say, we did an IPO within 18 months. And it was a crazy time. And we knew the stock was overpriced and was running when it shouldn't have run. And we were barely existing. And
did you become millionaires and at the IPO?
I don't even remember whether I was or not.
Well, I'll tell you, Jim, if you became a millionaire based on your background, you would have remembered.
What I do remember is
that's one of those red letter days. Okay, come on, Jim.
Well, I might have been a millionaire for a little while, but
okay.
We knew that the stuff.
Well, you had a lockup period, so you couldn't get out, right?
Well, that's right. We did. Yeah, the market. But anyway, we knew it was overpriced and pretty far overpriced. And so how do we take advantage of that? So I put on my traveling hat And we bought 13 companies in 18 months.
Is this when you were part of Equitable?
No, this was before.
Still
that.
as a public company.
Yeah, this was our first public company in Austin.
So I just had somebody come to me recently, a young man, probably in his early 30s, and now he's with a startup, and they've got now a big chunk of money came in as sort of like a Series B. And one of the things they've decided to do is they said that we need to grow through acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he's calling me saying they want me to be the guy that actually looks for companies and acquires them. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, what do you tell that guy? Because you were that guy, right? At that exact same age, probably.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend the way I went about it.
Well, how did you go about it?
First of all, I resigned myself to the fact I had to travel.
Oh, okay.
And to this day, I still have over 2 million frequent flyer miles. And so I didn't know where these places were. And most everything then was not software products. It was data centers.
Yeah, but the difficulty then too is it's not like back then you went online and you did a search and all the right companies came up. How did you even know what companies that were out there?
Well, you got on a plane and you went to places like Boston, Minneapolis, San Francisco, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and you got the phone book out and you looked up data centers. And then you called them and you made an appointment. And you went out and you got to meet them, and everybody was willing to be bought for some price. And that's usually true today as well. And
so that's how you would approach them. You would say that when you called them up out of the phone book, you would probably call the CEO, right? Or ask for him. And if you got to him, this is the days before. The only communication that we had that was instant communication was telephone back then.
That's it.
So how did you, what was your pitch to the guy that he said, all right, I'll meet with you?
Well, I just told him what we were doing. We were acquiring companies and would describe the company we had in Austin.
Okay.
Where we built hardware and we were building life insurance software, and we were running a couple of data centers.
Okay.
And so we did it all very early. And so I would just describe who we were and what we were interested in, why I'd called him. And now,
what was the process that you went through to actually then, here you are, you didn't even know what the process was to acquire companies. No. You didn't understand terms. You didn't understand a lot of things. How did you what did you actually do to kind of acquire your first company?
Well, I had a little knowledge from having gone to the business school.
Okay.
About financials and progress and EBITDA and valuation techniques, and so I knew something. Not enough. But anyway, we bought stuff right and left for, mainly data centers, and then we'd consolidate them.
Were you a cash buyer or were you a stock buyer?
Oh, we were pretty much a cash buyer.
Cash buyers, okay.
And, but what I didn't tell you is we were backed by a company in Austin by the name of Tracor. Tracor is a scientific discovery company that did a lot of government work. And so we were pretty well funded by them. And we didn't have to go out and talk to VCs and whatnot.
Well, who taught you? Who were you accountable to? I mean, they didn't just take this young early 30s guy and say, yeah, get on the road and just buy stuff. I mean, you had to be accountable to somebody.
Well, we were accountable to the financial statements.
Okay.
And we had to review them with the people who were sponsoring us. And And we didn't meet with them very much. They didn't ask very much because I guess they liked what they saw. I don't know. But that's been a long
Yeah,
time ago.
but you aren't the only guy. You aren't the sole decision maker on an acquisition. You had to probably present it to somebody to get a sign off, right?
Well, I had my partner, the fellow I described, my IBM partner, the guy with a PhD in physics.
Yeah.
So we were working together, and so I don't ever remember making a presentation to the CEO or president of the company that sponsored us. They just trusted us.
So you were basically the iconic cowboy from Austin buying companies.
I guess so. And the pitch must have been good enough to get 13 people on the hook. And there were all kind of interesting things that happened, like the 3 companies we bought in Albuquerque. 2 of them were data centers that were fierce opponents. They were the 2 operations in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that did data service.
Yeah.
But then we bought a 3rd one that was a bunch of PhD scientists that came out of Sandia. And boy, they mixed like oil and water when we tried to put the 3 of them together. And I wound up going out there and firing all 3 of the presidents, former owners.
Who were they? So when you acquire companies, one of the things you got to keep in mind is how are they going to fit in to the company that you already have? So you got to assign executives and do all that. So did everybody then start working for you, all these acquirers? All these acquired companies?
Yeah, they started working, and I was kind of the guy that went around and monitored most of them.
Oh, you did? Okay.
We let them operate for the most part. And we learned a lot because some did well, some didn't. And some we consolidated and sold. And so there were all kinds of deals being made at the time.
Well, if you got 3 companies in Albuquerque and the 3 presidents are at each other's throats, and they're your companies, I mean, that's a big decision to go fire 3 people at one time. I mean,
and as I recall, it was pretty much at one time and within a couple of weeks, and but I had backup. I had people within those organizations that I had my eye on to put into those roles. And things.
When you look back in those things, how did you identify those people, those leaders that were going to step in? Because that early on this is your early on sort of building management teams at this point.
Yeah. Well, I always made a point of having employee meetings, whatever the situation, whatever the entity, and and get feedback. What do you think is good? What do you think is not good? What do you think we should be doing? What are we doing wrong? And you can create an environment where people will say what they think.
Yeah.
And you figure out pretty fast who's on the ball and who will take responsibility and who the others look up to, and that's a biggie to discover. Who do they all think? Who do they listen to when he or she is talking?
That's interesting because there are in every organization there are these quiet leaders. In other words, they don't have the titles, but they certainly have the influence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question about it.
And that's what you looked for.
Every time.
Yeah.
Every time. And they're always there. And they love it when you seek their advice. You call them back after you've been on their premises and you say, well, George, what did you think about X? And you begin to get that sort of thing going. And there's the other side of the folks who aren't so hot, and you got to get rid of them.
Okay. And, how do you get rid of somebody if you're sort of seeing, like you said, you bring all the employees together. You have somebody that's reporting to you, and yet you see that there are people on his team that are ineffective and really do need to be let go. How do you kind of managed through that person to make sure that those people do leave the company?
Well, sometimes it's very difficult because sometimes they're brothers-in-law or
Oh God.
or brothers or
Yeah.
college friends, roommates, and that's one of my other pitches. Is when you hire a manager, uh, it's got to be somebody who can do the job and fit the job description that you have for that task, and
Not just somebody that you trust, right? And know.
not just somebody that you trust and was in a fraternity with.
Yeah,
you know.
right.
That's one of the big mistakes I see with young entrepreneurs is they choose the wrong people up early at the front of the deal. And
That's a great insight because that happens so frequently.
It does.
And it puts you at an immediate disadvantage unless you make a decision quickly, which people rarely do because the friendship is more important than the company, in effect,
Well, yeah. And one of the awful things that happens, Charlie, with that situation is you get stranded stock. And you've given stock options to your brother-in-law, and now you've got to fire him. And so did you do a buyback provision in his contract?
Mm-hmm.
And you should always do that and have a way to get that stock back in the company's hands and not have it stranded out there in somebody who's mad at you.
I think that's a great time. Never heard that term stranded stock, but there is these passive stockholders that you wind up with, and it is like take a step, drag them along, because they're just not involved with anything that you're doing in building value. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's enough dilutive effect as you build a company in your security and so much potential for getting your own shares diluted as you add people and all.
Yeah.
And that's a big mistake area for young entrepreneurs, I think, is they give away too much too soon.
No, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So let's take this. Now, about an hour ago, I asked you a question, and I know we've gotten down this rabbit trail. Okay, but I want to come back to the question. So now you're an EVP running half the company, all vertical markets at Informatics General Corporation, an independent public company. It was one of really two software companies that were out there. One was EDS, run by Ross Perot, and then there was you guys.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting. So in the board meeting, you said they wanted to grow, and organic growth wasn't going to provide the fast enough growth, so they said they were going to do acquisitions, right?
Yes.
And so you certainly had the experience to do that, having had done it for the startup that you talked about. Were you one of the proponents of that strategy then?
Well, I was less aggressive in forming a strategy than the board was.
Okay.
And we had a good board. And like the CFO of Lockheed Martin was on there, and then others I could name, but
but these are senior business executives with lots of experience, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. And so one particular day, I remember there was a board meeting going on, and I was presenting to the board, and they got on the subject of acquisitions and why aren't we acquiring more companies? And I had been beating the bushes, but not with a very big stick.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of that sort of thing going on. So valuations were high, and I gave them the reply of things are too high, and you have to be very, very careful. You pay too much. And they kind of retorted with the comments, damn the torpedoes.
Oh, really?
Go for it. And that was somewhere in the period of time that I met you guys. And
So how did you? This is again. I'm going to go off a little bit on a tangent about boards. You've served on a lot of boards. What
I
did
have
you? Yeah. So what is the? How important is a board to a? I can to a young company. Okay.
very,
Like Richard and I, we didn't have any board. It was just me and Richard and Robert. We were the three of us sort of just doing our thing, right? So now I'm seeing companies because they're taking on money, outside money earlier. Okay, is they find themselves with board members, and it always winds up being again the two fraternity brothers
yeah.
and the angel investor. What would your advice be to these younger companies about boards?
Well, usually you get a combined investor board member, and it's very important that the board members are able to give you good advice because they have good experience,
Okay.
and also they have contacts that can help you with whatever you're doing. And so you should choose board members for their value to you. And that could be money.
Not
and
just their friendliness to you.
No, they may even not like you.
Okay.
And,
So isn't that important that you really have some sort of a chemistry there, or maybe it's not?
I think it's very important to have that chemistry.
Okay.
And no, I've been on boards that fired their CEO, and fired other board members.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how many boards I've been on. It's probably a dozen or so. And then some really, really good boards.
Yeah.
Like
I thought
the
one of the
Silicon
things
Valley
that I
Bank.
do is I tell these younger companies, I said, you need to bring people on that will help you build value
Yes.
in the basically short to midterm. And then you kind of outgrow board members too. Some guys that are like, I'm a really good sort of startup guy, but once you get up past that sort of 10 million and all, that's another board member who's got to take you to that 25, 30 million,
Right.
So it's, you got to know your sweet spot, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know, I used to study boards, just kind of like fun, get a proxy statement and who's on that board and that sort of thing. And there was a time when college presidents and higher education folks would be invited to boards. And after oh boy, I can't remember the name of the change in the law of accounting, where boards were more held responsible. That started changing. If you watched that, you found that college presidents and chancellors and higher ed guys were beginning to exit the boards, and
because there was real liability at this point, right? Yeah, and so you had to have the qualifications, not just a good community name, I guess. Yeah.
Well, now you have to have a certain number of independent board members.
I see.
Certain percentage, and you'll see that mentioned in every proxy of every public company.
What do you think the impact's going to be as in this environment that we're in today, where there's this huge push for diversity in boards? Is that going to increase the quality of the board, or what do you think?
I think it makes selection more difficult.
Okay.
Because of the availability.
Got it.
So if you appoint someone just because of their race or religion or something,
or their sex or whatever it is, yeah, I mean it could be on any of that.
The only reason you bring them on board, you've made a mistake.
Yeah.
And
so there might be, as we go forward, so on a lot of these boards, there may be some compromise.
Well, that worries me a bit.
Okay.
If that's true. That could be true and probably is.
What you're saying, though, is the issue starts deeper in the company. that the
Yeah.
diversity needs to start in the hiring process, if you will, and then the recruiting process, and then through the management ranks and process. That's where all the diversity needs to happen,
Yeah.
not just first at the board level.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I could tell you some stories that would curl your hair about that whole area, but I don't want it on.
Yeah, we don't need to go there. I was actually arguing with myself internally. What should I go there? But I'm interested in your
Yeah.
quick answer, and that you answered that question. So let's go back to the board that you had at informatics, and now they gave you they said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," right?
Yeah.
And so Jim is a mainframe guy in now what is a vertical market world that's being serviced by mini computers and on the verge of microcomputers.
Yes, that's right.
All right. It was the beginning of the end at that time for IBM when they just poo-pooed the whole, when I think it was Ackerman. He said, that PC thing's never going to be anything. We won't sell more than, I think he said 5,000 units or something.
Yeah, Akers.
Akers, that was his name. John Akers, right, yeah. And that was the early 80s. And that's when we met you. It was mid-1981, I believe.
Okay. Your memory's better than mine. But I think you alluded to my story about being on the IBM Advisory Council for PCs in Boca Raton.
I didn't know you were on that council.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they invited all the mainframe guys to be on the PC council? I love it.
The way it was. I really got a dose of the current IBM at that time. I'd been gone a while. But there were about 6 of us that were invited to be on that Boca Raton venture. And they spent a lot of money on that. And so we had meetings. I think they cut it off at 2 meetings, if I remember right. And so what we found is that the people running that were all from IBM. They were all mainframe people.
Uh-huh.
They knew how to build computers. They knew about chips, but they didn't know about the market and how it was moving. And they just did not accept, like you said a while ago, they did not accept the fact that the world was moving to the personal computer.
Wow.
And we even tried to convince them of that. Not that we were yet experts either, but they just wouldn't go there. And the whole Boca Raton thing, eventually went away.
What do you mean they just wouldn't go there? Go where?
Well, they couldn't fathom you or me or anybody else having a little laptop or a PC.
Oh, I see. Okay.
In their home. I mean, a computer in the home? Come on, you got to be kidding.
Yeah, because their market at that time I would say is what, with their mini computers, it was really and I'm talking the System 3, Model 10 and Model 15s. This was in the early 70s before they came out with the smaller business computer called the System 32. Then their whole market was sort of maybe the Fortune 1000. They weren't really, so to think personal computer, that was a huge leap.
It was a very big leap, and they didn't want to make it.
Okay.
And that came out in the Boca Raton. That was experimental in my view, and they just never convinced the higher ups.
So that was really the beginning of the end of the IBM that we actually loved and knew and respected.
It was, in my view.
Isn't that something? So the PC itself was the thing that was this little PC, this tiny computer was the Achilles heel for the management team up in where's their headquarters?
Poughkeepsie.
In Poughkeepsie, yeah. That's where they built those big mainframes, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
so what did you so here you are, mainframe guy, you see what they're doing and the mistake and the decisions that they're making. You didn't agree with them. You must have seen something different than they saw.
Well, we were beginning to see it because we were finding out about people like Steve Jobs and Wozniak and
Bill Gates,
Bill Gates was kind of wandering around in the neighborhood and Harvard halls. And
you had meetings with all these guys, didn't you?
well, I never met Steve Jobs.
Oh, okay.
I think I was in a meeting one time with Wozniak, but it did nothing material.
Okay.
But I did encounter Gates, and that's one of those things that I'm sure he would not remember. But it was early on, and he was peddling his operating system for PCs, or whatever we called them then. And he was just barely, able probably to pay for a plane ticket. I don't know, but he's very small, slender young man, and extremely polite. And but anyway, through a business broker, he got into my office in Los Angeles, and he was trying to find home for his operating system, which he had gotten somewhere. I'm not sure. I think he got it from Battelle Institute.
Okay.
Which was the Windows inventor, and he had somehow gotten rights.
I think was it Xerox or Battelle?
Well, no, Xerox came out of Battelle.
Okay.
Xerography came out of Battelle.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and then maybe Xerox was the Windows, but somewhere in that amalgamation it came. But anyway, he came, and he very polite and very forthright, and we sat face to face across my desk, and he was just trying to sell his little company called Microsoft. And I thought, well, we're mainframe people. What would we do with that? So I fell into the same trap that the IBM people did. But then later on, as IBM,
do you remember what you were thinking at that time on why you gave that kind of an answer? Because I'm sure he gave a compelling pitch. He's a smart guy.
Yeah. There's no way I could possibly find a way to criticize him at all, then or now.
That's why I'm saying, what were you thinking? You heard this pitch. You said, what would we ever do with that? So you couldn't make the leap from the technology, the operating system, to the market. That's the gap.
Well, I had some knowledge of operating systems, and having gone through the 360 thing and all of that.
Yeah.
But I just didn't connect for some reason. And as far as I remember, I was the only one at Informatics that talked with him. And later on, IBM, I think, really got him off the ground in that.
That changed everything. Yeah. I mean, he became the operating system for the IBM PC, and that just changed everything for him. That was the launch of Microsoft.
And the interesting things, it made him, but didn't make them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
he never gave up. He never gave up ownership of that operating system, the IBM.
No, he had a treasure, and he knew it, and I didn't know it.
There you go. But how did you go about then, as a mainframe guy for informatics, how did you go about doing acquisitions? Because the acquisitions in vertical markets at that time were people like me and Richard who were selling to that. We were automating. In fact, Richard and I were involved in automating CPA offices for the very first time.
Yeah.
All manual, right? So these, the big verticals like life insurance were they became automated first by buying mainframes and all. And then when it started moving to smaller, less expensive computers, it moved into the smaller vertical markets, and the smaller players. So how did you come around how does a mainframe company acquire, I think at the time we were like about a $4.8 million revenue vertical market company. I mean, we were nothing to you guys. Okay.
Well, you were larger than a lot of people I talked to. Yeah, but I had an event during that time that was about the time I was talking to you and Richard. But it went like this. I had frequent meetings with the CEO of informatics that you knew, and he was a founder and CEO and PhD, smart man, and and we were talking one day, and he said, "Jim, I know you're out there and you're all over the place looking for things to buy and trying to follow through with our strategy." He said, "I want to tell you something." He said, "I know our procedure here is that you find it and you analyze it and then you bring it to me. And then I approve it, we buy it, or I don't." And he had never disapproved of anything that I brought in at that point. And he said, "But I want to tell you something. From this point forward, if you can't prove to me that it's as good a deal for the seller as it is for us, the buyer, then I'm not going to approve it." And he said, "It's got to be fair."
Huh.
And so
Why did he bring that up to you?
I don't know.
Okay.
I never knew for sure, except I think I had gotten kind of a reputation of being a little tough.
I see. Okay.
But he didn't say that. But that I never forgot that, and I remember that it happened, I think, before we met. And
I hope so.
Yeah. So you need to be assured you got a fair deal.
Okay, good. But knowing you, we didn't get a great deal.
But I want to bring up one other thing on management. I don't know how much time we have, but this thing of tough-minded management,
Mm-hmm.
I really believe in that, and hopefully practiced it somewhat. And but there's a book that's been out forever named Tough-Minded Management, and it's by a fellow by the name of Joe Batten.
Right.
And he has since updated the book, but it's still old, even the updates, but it's right on target. And it basically says management is a hour-to-hour, day-to-day job. And if you have a problem, get on it, solve it, get rid of it, get going. And when I see people doing massive layoffs, I conclude one thing without knowing the facts: that's bad management. And that's bad for people. And people should not be treated that way. If they're not doing the job, they should be confronted and helped, and then let go if they can't adjust.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the most important principles of management that we can learn, my opinion.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, is that you can't, because if you allow mediocrity to stay there, to stay within the organization, eventually the organization will get to the lowest level of performers, and you'll be, and then you got to do layoffs, right? Because you don't hit your numbers and you can't sustain the company.
And you hurt people.
And you hurt people, yeah.
Well, and then if I can use that to go a little further to the entrepreneur level, I find that entrepreneurs don't fix their mistakes early enough, and they don't pivot when they need to early enough. And they fall in love with their cows, as we say in Texas, and as a result, they can't admit that they're on the wrong path or they need to adjust their path. But very few entrepreneurship ventures don't pivot to some degree as they grow or as they build. And you have to be willing to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a fellow that I had interviewed here recently who was with one of the premier VCs. Came out of Harvard and he went to work for VC, and then he later became a CEO of public companies. But he made a comment. He said, when I first was interviewing with this VC, they had all of their what are those things called? The go public kind of the tombstones. Okay. Yeah, they had all the tombstones. And he was pointing to all these different tombstones, of these public companies these companies that were acquired by bigger companies. And the VC said to him, how many of these companies that you see here went public or were bought out based on their original idea?
Yeah. Good question.
And the answer was 0. Okay.
Yeah.
0. So that's to your point of pivots. Don't fall in love with what you got. It gets you into the market, but you have to listen to the market.
You really do. Well, speaking of tombstones, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. There you go. Triad systems.
I've got probably, I don't know, a couple of dozen of those.
That's great. There's not a lot of general managers like you that have those. That's pretty cool. That's a great career.
But it's business is a lot of fun. Life is a lot of fun. And certainly if you've got enough toughness to get through some of the things you should discard along the way, then you got a good chance. But
what did you see? Like, you saw a lot of companies when you're doing this acquisition. What did you see when you came to our company, Richards and our company, called MCS? What did you see that kept you in the game as opposed to having the one meeting and then moving on?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because it relates to a principle, and that is when you look at something you want to buy or take on or enter a market on your own, you really need to study that market. There are two things that I look at, and by the way, there's a whole case and article on this in one of the Harvard business cases, but it has to do with market and management.
Okay.
And first of all, you evaluate the management. Is it up to the task? And if not, you're going to have to change it out or just move on down the road and look somewhere else. And then maybe more important is to understand the market that they're in. Now, what's the market window look like? Is it opening? In other words, becoming larger? Is it closing, being saturated, or even diminishing? Or is it stable?
I got it.
And if it's any of those two and not growing, you probably don't want to go there. Now, it was more difficult in those days to assess that. And today you can Google all over the place and learn a lot. And kind of as an aside, I've found, because of my association with these universities, I can go to a marketing professor and say, I would like to get a study on the X market. And would you consider giving your students a project to study this market? And here are the parameters I want them to look at. And most of the time, the professor will say, hallelujah, yes, I'll do that. And these kids do a great job.
But as somebody who's looking to acquire companies, you're really looking to evaluate, are these markets that are opening or stable or closing, so that you know whether you got something there. So even if you have a good management team, if it's in a slow growth to no growth market, it's still not going to be an acquisition. You're not going to make it. Yeah, that makes sense. But if you have an opening market and you have a weak management team, would you still pass?
Yes.
You'd still pass. Okay.
Unless I had some plan to absorb it. combine it.
which increases the risk, does it not, for a larger company?
It does. It does. But sometimes the employees are kind of wanting that. They know what's leading their company, and employees are not stupid.
Yeah.
They get a sense of what's going on, and you can find out an awful lot by just rummaging around a young company's offices and just dropping in and talking.
And do companies back then, did companies allow you that kind of freedom?
I never asked.
Wow. You just did it.
I just did it.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That is great. One of the things that happened is you had put somebody in charge of acquisitions, after you acquired us. Okay. And here I am, I'm running MCS at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you started giving me responsibilities. This is after the earnout. You started giving me responsibilities of other companies. Okay. And you said, okay, we're doing acquisitions. And if we acquire a vertical market company, we're going to give it to you.
Yeah.
And man, you gave me one that was just awful. That was there was no return on my investment. They were bad management. The market it was the management that killed it. The market was good, but the management killed it. And I spent so much time with those people. And I remember calling you up and saying, how could you have done this to me? And you said, you don't even remember this, but you said to me, you know what happens, Charlie, if you put somebody in charge of acquisitions, they have a tendency to acquire companies.
That's probably true.
And I was like, oh, great, Jim. And he says, well, the guy did his job. He acquired companies. He just didn't do it well with this one,
Especially when a board's pushing you to do it.
Yeah, right. It's just, acquire companies.
Yeah.
And then there's got to be some manager there who's going to absorb it and do something with it, right?
Well, for sure, everything that I had something to do with buying or selling, it didn't necessarily do well, because I think I actually made a tally here of things I'm in now or have been in the last few years.
Yeah.
And well, this is nearly accurate. 5 of them have been sold, 1 IPO, 2 of them are still very active, 4 are inactive.
Oh, okay.
And
these are companies that you had either were on the board or you made angel investments in?
Yeah. And,
okay.
I run a little portfolio called Porter Capital Partners.
Okay.
And this is what's in there. So
what happened though, when you were acquiring companies at that time for informatics though, you had some successes. What made a success for you? How did you view it, 5 years post-acquisition?
Well, I think whether they integrated well or not, and just the obvious about how well they worked the market and whether they grew or not. And in some cases, they would.
So that's 2 things. So that's whether they grew, in other words, hit their numbers that you expected. And that's how you established your valuation, right? Based on the numbers that they would hit. But then the second piece is how well they integrated. Speak to that a little bit.
Well, how well they worked with other kinds of companies that might have had similar problems, because we had frequent get-togethers over time, and a fair amount of exchange between these companies that really operated separately, but they got to know each other, learn from each other. And so that helped out a lot.
I think you took a page out of Harold Janine's book.
Really?
He you remember ITT manager? He was another guy you recommended that I read about.
Oh, okay.
And he used to have these monthly 3-day general management meetings where he pulled these guys in from all over the world, and they would each have to present their business to the entire group. And Janine, of course, would be well well versed in their numbers and in their company. So he would just grill them in front of everybody. Okay.
Yeah.
And you did it at informatics. You guys were nicer about it. Okay.
Uh-huh.
But the idea was you're watching and learning from each other
Yeah.
as you're presenting your businesses. And you knew that guy isn't long for life, or that guy's he's going to be a star, right? I mean, you knew just by seeing the group together.
Well, and that had a lot of psychological effect of motivating people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you figured out looking around in those meetings that you were kind of the dark pony that wasn't running very fast, it either motivated you or you got left Dodge. And so there was that.
What did you do? How did you, when you would do these acquisitions, one of the things you did is you always looked, you said, I brought the companies together, the employees together, and I would watch and ask questions and see who responded and see who the sort of quiet leader was, that influencer that didn't have the title and all. How did you then, when you saw that, how did you develop those people? I think I was one of those people that you sort of poured yourself into.
Yeah. Well, of course, like I say, I had still have 2 million frequent flyer miles. So I went around a lot. But more importantly, I think something you and I have talked about was management training, our own version that started in informatics, and I carried it on to try it in a larger way. But anyone with a first level management job or up had to go through the training. And it was a 2-week course that was done at headquarters. And it was limited to about 12 people or so, maybe 12 or 15 people.
Wow.
All of whom had management jobs already.
So it was a boot camp.
It was a boot camp.
Yeah.
And it was taught sometimes reluctantly by the people who were above these people, like the CFO or the marketing head or whatever.
Yeah.
And when they found out they were going to have to teach class, they got really busy and developed good material. We hired a professional educator to oversee the preparation of material, the way it was delivered.
What a great idea.
And everybody had to go through that once they got to the first level of management, not before, but after. And you mentioned that when you get people together in a group, they begin to figure out who's who. And they begin to figure out where they are on the totem pole. And so that has great value when later on you promote somebody. Everybody knows why, because they've seen them.
Yeah, I got it.
They've competed with them in those classes.
And look at what you've done. I think, which is also interesting, is to say you didn't bring in sort of the HR sort of management training course people, if you will, right? You know, what you did is you said, no, we're going to have our existing managers of these up and coming managers actually lead this. But they're also going to develop, because they're going to have to be coached by a professional educator on how to impart these principles, if you will, that they're trying to impart, you know. So everybody develops at the same time, because you become a better manager teaching about management.
Yeah.
Because you got to think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you do, and you learn from one another. You said it perfectly. That's exactly the way it goes. You just can't throw somebody out there without helping them be better.
Yeah.
And if they can't make it, then, you know, you have to do what you have to do.
Yeah.
And I got somewhat jaundiced about firing people very early in the game, way back at the first startup in Austin. we had a sales guy, and I noticed that he wasn't doing very well, and he wasn't bringing in much, and called him in and chatted with him, gave him a little time, called him in again, told him he was going to have to leave the company. And he cried and moaned and, blamed me for killing his kids and all kinds of stuff. And I found out a couple of days later, he had already been working for another guy, another company. And he had been there for a month or two. And he was drawing 2 paychecks. Well, so, you need to look behind the.
I heard a similar story. You'll get a kick out of this. I heard a story about this guy who had taken over a region as a sales manager. And he said, I had a salesman that was down in South Florida. And he said, the guy, was just not cutting it. I mean, he was not selling. And he said, but the guy was married and he had 6 kids. And he said, I just felt awful. He said, how could I fire a guy that's got 6 kids? I mean, I don't want to do that to his family.
Yeah.
And he said, while he's struggling for a couple of months thinking, what can I do with this guy? At the end of that period, the guy comes in and quits. And he said, you're quitting? He goes, yeah. He said, I'm leaving my wife and kids. I got a new girlfriend and we're moving to New York. And he said, at that time, I realized I cared more about his kids than he did. Okay.
Yeah. Do you have time for another war story?
Yeah, go ahead.
About sales? Well, when I became CEO of Triad Systems later on, which we haven't talked much about, I went into the field a lot. I met the movers and shakers of the industries we served, and it paid off big time. And we had 15,000 customers using our products, and we were in a vertical market.
Yeah, you were automotive vertical, right? Yeah.
Automotive and hardware.
Okay.
Yeah. Wholesale and retail hardware. But anyway, I had this one sales guy. We had 200 salespeople all over the U.S., Canada, Great Britain, South America. And this one guy who was a former football player had a great record, and he was near the top all the time. And I looked at weekly production reports, and his was beginning to fall off a little. So I called him and talked to him. I said, well, Randy, what's the deal? And this isn't like you. And made him mad. And that I would call him and reprimand him a little bit because he had a big ego. And so we talked, and then about a month later, we had one of these President's Circle things going in Hawaii.
Yeah.
We took 300 people to Hawaii and had a great time and lots of meetings and recognizing people. So this guy, Randy, he was getting an award of some kind, but when I was on the stage, called his name, and he was in the back of the room, and he jumped out of his chair. He ran up to the stage, and he's holding papers in his hand up above his head. And he jumps from the floor to the stage, and his momentum carries him through the back curtain into the depression in the back.
Yeah.
And he comes crawling up out of the back and onto the stage. And he takes these contracts. It turns out they're sales contracts. He's got a handful of them. And he throws them in my face and he says, here. And so you never know, what kind of, if you've got a person who's capable and you challenge them and maybe even insult them a little bit, you find out what they're made of. And he was one of those guys.
Wow. That's a great story.
Well, I'm full of them, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, being full of great stories is the way to be. And you've lived a great life. One of the things I pulled away from this that I think is so important for the entrepreneurs that I hope to serve, with these interviews, is that you talked about how to identify leaders. Okay. Those future leaders. And I like your idea where you said, I bring the company together and I start asking questions about the business and see who sort of steps forward and has that clarity of thinking, right? That was one. And then you said, I look at how they are viewed by other people, their peers, so are they kind of set apart? And of course, the other thing they have to have, the other element is they have to be good performers, right? And if they weren't, they wouldn't have been respected by their peers anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's so important in growing a startup, is to find those people who are those real leaders that are going to take your company forward.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
Well, I could, there's one in particular. I'm blessed with a lot of these young people that I have, I guess you could say, encouraged, that still come back and visit with Leila and I, and they bring their kids, and some of them have formed and sold 2 companies in one case, 3 in another. But lots of them that have built their companies. There's one in particular that I was always our top salesman in Triad, that we gave a Porsche to top salesman every year. And this kid had, I don't know, half a dozen Porsches in his driveway. But he wouldn't drive them to the client's office because he didn't want them to think he was making too much money. And
I see. Okay.
my view was always, I'm happy to pay a salesman more than I make, and because I help me make more money. And by the way, a random thought that's coming is, when you put your strategic plan together, make sure that your incentive plan matches it. Always keep them in sync, and keep your strategic plan a living plan that you visit often.
Yeah.
So but back to this story of this boy with all the Porsches. He has stayed in contact with me ever since the Triad days. And I was on the board of Cardona Industries, a billion-dollar company in Philadelphia that makes auto parts. And the owner and CEO kept saying, Jim, we need another board member. I said, well, I'm going to introduce you to this boy named Stan. And but I warn you, you're going to fall in love with him. You better be ready for that. And Stan wound up being CEO. He came on the board and he became CEO of Cardone Industries.
Isn't that something?
And he was involved with TPG and what was the other one? Big private equity firm. He engineered the selling of that company for, I don't know, this big number. And he now is living a pretty good life, but looking to start another one. And he's
let me end this interview with this question: is
sure.
What made Stan successful?
I'm not sure, except he just wanted to be first. He was a New England boy.
Sounds like the Tom Brady kind of success.
Yeah, it really is. That's a good analogy. And when he, like us, had a wonderful wife, and like us, I think, my wife and I belong to the same church, and from our birth until now.
Wow.
And, that's one of those things that helps. Stan and his wife, same thing, good Catholics. And I think you're in the same boat. But I think that makes a lot of difference.
But he also had that will to just win. It was like in him.
Oh, yeah.
He couldn't not be that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the only way to identify that is through their goals and their achievements. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And do they set their goals that are stretch or not?
Yeah.
And good people want to stretch.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Well, Jim, this has just been wonderful. I'm glad that we got the technology all squared away, and I'm glad that we spent so much time together here. And we could go on, but let's give the audience a break. There's so much for them to absorb from all of the stories that you told and the lessons that you've learned. This has been fabulous. I really appreciate it.
Same here. And I would like to point out that you're the one that solved the technology problems.
Oh, I did. Okay. Yeah. Well, leave it to me.
Thank you for that. And thank you for giving me a good time here.
Well, you're a great man. And we need to do more of this because there's even more stories. I'd love to get into some depth on the whole triad situation. And I'd love to get into some depth on what happened at your 17 years as a board member on Silicon Valley Bank. We
didn't get there, did we?
No, but there's so much more there, so much to learn.
Well, do you have 1 minute?
All right, I'll give you 1 minute and then I got
1 minute. All right. 1 minute. Well, being on the Silicon Valley Bank board gave me access to a number of their funds.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, they had some funds of funds, you know what those are.
Yeah.
And so I got into things like NEA, Trinity, Menlo, Lightspeed, Canaan, Axel, Battery, Sequoia, Vinrock, Charles River, Oak. And that gave me, got me into companies that you could name like, well, I won't go there. You can imagine. But
I can't even imagine. I mean,
it was a wonderful experience. I wouldn't take for it. The 17 years. I got to chair the board credit committee. So I saw all this stuff going through, and that was fun and sometimes alarming. Anyway, we can go there next time.
We will go there next time for sure.
All right.
So, Jim, thanks. I'm going to close this. I'm going to mute you and I'll just close this out quickly and we'll be on our way. So thanks to Jim and thanks to you for joining me and Jim in this wonderful interview. Jim's got some amazing experience, as you now know, but taking that view of how do you get acquired? What's going on with those corporate executives and what are they thinking and what are they looking for? So as entrepreneurs, we have to build companies that have great leaders and serve great and growing markets. And that's what it's all about. But it's up to us to grow those great leaders. And that's how you build great companies that appear to be lower risk for some of these acquirers, these corporate acquirers. And that's how you get your great valuations. So thanks for joining us. And remember, sign up at paparelli.com and you'll receive the email so you won't miss one of these episodes. You could also download us on the Paparelli podcast and also I'm on YouTube. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jim. And everybody, you have a great day and continue to build your company successfully. Goodbye.